This is a biggie, and I am not ashamed to scream it out. It's Lush Life's 150th episode. And if that weren't exciting enough, my guest is Elliot Ball of, among many other bars he runs, the Cocktail Trading Company. I'm Susan Schwartz, your drinking companion, and this is Lush Life Podcast. Every week, we are inspired to live life one cocktail at a time by the best in the industry. What does it take to do 150 EPs? Well, the support of all of you who listen to the stories that inspire us to live life one cocktail at a time by the best in the industry. The best producer in the business, and I am biased, Terra of Simpler Media Productions and podcast Pontifications, and of course, the participation of all my guests. Why is it so special for me to have Elliot on this monumental occasion? Well, if you close your eyes and click your heels 3 times, you'll head straight back to my first episode many, many moons ago. I was pretty new at this, and he was so game. It was Andy Mill, not only my first guest of all time, but also Elliot's partner at Cocktail Trading Company. From that moment, I felt a deep connection to them and their bar. With their other partner, Ollie, their journey those almost 4 years since my first episode has been stratospheric. Now it's time for Elliot to tell us his story of how he's used his neuroscience background in the bar and catch up where Andy left off those 4 years ago, because a lot has changed. But make sure to listen all the way to the end for a special announcement. But before that, I'll let Elliot begin.
I grew up down in Kent, so that's one of those places which isn't in London, and so if you're not from the UK, you will have never heard of it, and you'll ask where it is, and I'll say it's not in London, and it'll keep going like that for a little bit. But it's about sort of maybe an hour and a half, like southeast of here, roughly. My mum's Australian, my dad is so English. And I grew up there, went to school there, and went to university over in Bath, studied psychology, neuroscience.
Okay, wait, you're going way too quickly. All right. Your dad is so English. What does that mean to you?
He rolls R's when there aren't even R's in the word.
I got it.
I think I've seen him cry during the Queen's speech once. Yeah.
Okay, so tough and R roller.
Yeah, tough maybe. He's a truly inspirational man. I think he's definitely more extraordinarily pleasant than tough. I think in terms of like surface terms people would apply to him. Yeah, different.
So you said you studied science.
I studied neuroscience. So,
neuroscience.
Yeah.
So what even led you to neuroscience?
It's kind of a spin-off of psychology. So I studied psychology when I was at school. I did not A-levels. I did something called the International Baccalaureate, which is so much more work for not many good reasons, if I'm honest. Really not.
A lot of those, usually if you want to go to the university in the States.
Yeah, IB's got like more of an international recognition, but given I was going to be going to university in the UK, it was just absolutely pointless.
Did you think I'm going to be a psychologist, or you were just going to university to learn how to think?
I 100% was one of those stereotype people who was putting off life by just taking the next academic step and going to university. I was eligible for a student loan, so I was like, sure, let's do it.
And why psychology, do you think?
There's a variety of answers. Some of them are cooler and some of them are more truthful than others. I think it was just more interesting to me at that stage, and then as I got into it, maybe I felt this at the time, and maybe it's just a really nice retrospective on it, but I just don't think there's anything more interesting than people. Like, even, what we've done to our planet and what it might do to us in return is more interesting than any other form of science. Like, the way atoms behave is predictable. The way humans behave is ridiculous. And I was always just fascinated by that.
Excuse my ignorance, but what is the shift from psychology to neuroscience? Or is neuroscience just a fancier word for psychology? I mean, what led you to that?
It's a slightly more specific part of it. So psychology as like an umbrella term is horribly diverse, and I think it's still like the second most oversubscribed degree in the UK. It just covers so many different things. And the university I went to was much more like science-based. Bath is really big for things like engineering, that kind of thing. And while we studied a lot of different types of psychology within it, the bit that I was so much more interested in was neuroscience, perhaps because it was like that midpoint between science and, humanity. Trying to get those two gears to fit together is compellingly interesting.
And again, forgive my ignorance again, is that the science of how the brain actually works?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay, so I got it.
Yeah, you got it.
And so when you graduated, were you going to work for a neuroscientist? Were you a neuroscientist when you got out?
I had a placement in my third year out at Macquarie University in Sydney, and I considered going back over there. I considered a variety of things, to be honest, but I don't think I really had enough conviction for any of the possibilities. And so I'd worked in bars throughout university. It's kind of how I supported myself, and I just decided to keep working in bars. I don't think there was any one turnaround point where I thought, nah, screw all of this. This is what I love, and I'm going to stick to it. I don't think I really thought that. I think I just kept doing what I was doing, and realized that I enjoyed it vastly more than anything I'd done within psychology. And conveniently, there aren't too many neuroscientists in bartending nowadays, so there was definitely a niche available to me.
Now, when you decided to start working during university, why did you pick a bar?
There's definitely a bit of a stereotype of hospitality jobs available to students. It's one of the best and worst things about hospitality as an industry, that you don't always need to be that skilled to go into it. And I definitely wasn't very skilled, in large part because I wasn't especially motivated. I was doing a very good degree at the time, so I wasn't exactly trying to build a career for myself by stepping into hospitality. I liked what it did to my social life. I've always kind of felt socially confined by stuff. Like, I went to a really nice school and everything, but I kind of felt confined by the bubble I was in there. And when I went to university, I deliberately went for the cheapest possible accommodation to try to escape that bubble. And I think I found myself in a similar thing when I was at university, which is, you're stuck in a student bubble as well. And that's a really diverse one, but it's still got that unifying demographic of, I'm an academic, I'm, a student. And I loved the difference of stepping out of that and going into hospitality.
So what kind, was it a bar, a pub? What kind of, do you remember your first job?
Yeah, my very first pub job, I think might have been the Huntsman in Bath. And that was an absolutely gross bar. And then, whenever I went, there were places before that. I think that was my first one at uni, in school holidays and stuff, because I was from quite a small, I think town would probably be an overstatement. Village, maybe. There was a green and everything.
And a pub, I assume.
Yeah, and many pubs. This is England. So there were one or two local restaurants, and I was a pot wash there and stuff, and they'd let me work on the bar a little bit, even though that was definitely illegal because of my age. So I'd kind of always been doing it to some extent. And then when I was at university, I started working perhaps slightly more fun bars. Definitely one of those social high points as a student is having your friends come into the bar where you're working, and you're free drinks for these guys, or something like that. Definitely makes you feel amazing when you do it for the first few times, at least.
Do you think you met a lot of people, or that it fulfilled that need to meet people outside of the bubble?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. The funny thing is now I'm probably more confined to that bubble in a way, because pretty much all my friends work in hospitality, but there's still the most unbelievably diverse set of people, and that's kind of what kept me glued to it, because it's not just the people who you meet out on the floor. That's the constant narrative, which, if I'm a little bit cynical, it's very, very fashionable to be saying about why you're a bartender. It's, I get to serve people and I get to meet all these new people, and that is true, and that is as invigorating as it can sometimes be crushing. But mostly the people I worked with were just amazing, just such energetic people with such brightness behind the eyes that I hadn't encountered to the same degree in psychology. Psychology, obviously, very, very intelligent, motivated people working there, but that sense of energy I didn't encounter until I was working in hospitality.
And when you were working throughout university, did you see a difference in what you were doing, or did you recognize a difference in what you were doing in the jobs that made you stay? Did you feel like you were growing?
I I had a lot more fun. And I think that does produce a growth in itself, you know. There was a sense of self-confidence which came out through hospitality, which I definitely didn't have exclusively from my degree. Like even as a student, like, you know, when you try to break down the things that make you confident as an individual, a lot of it is about your surroundings and the extent to which you think you're a master of them, what your social standing is, where you stand in, you know, whatever perceived ladder or pyramid or whatever. But in hospitality, it's, you know, it's different to that. I think my self-worth was like redefined in a way, and I just felt much more comfortable with myself, my bizarre sense of humor, and a variety of other things. And I think I kind of came to like myself more working in hospitality.
Mm-hmm. And when you graduated and decided that you were just going to continue working in the bars, were you going to stay in Bath? Graduating from neuroscience degree and going into bartending was really fun. Telling my parents, I wasn't sure if I should broach that, but now since you've let it out of the bag,
they're still getting over that.
All right, since you brought it up,
that was really fun. No, but I don't know.
Where were you working at that point?
I was working in a bar called Sub 13.
Okay. And what kind of things were you doing there that were making you so happy?
That was a cocktail bar, and I spent a year working there, and it was one of the best and worst years for me in that I had so much fun. It was such like a high intensity lifestyle, but it was also like gruesome work in some ways.
So were you working at night and then going to university classes, or were you just saying forget the university?
The year at Sub 13 actually came after I graduated. But yeah, when I was at university, I was sort of pulling 30-40 hours a week or so in pubs, actually mostly a couple of bars, and then I'd, you know, have classes and stuff, and that was a little bit of a stress, but not too bad. I was quite fortunate that Bath's a small place. You know, if you try to do that in London, you actually will lose probably 3 hours a day to travelling between, you know, two separate jobs. Bath, even if it's on the other side of the city and you really want to moan about it, it's still only a 35-minute walk at the absolute most.
But you were getting all your work done. You were getting all your studies.
Yeah, I was okay for workload and stuff. The other thing is, you know, people get, you know, their friendship groups like circles from so many different places. You've got your friends from school, your friends from university, your friends from your job, your friends from your local restaurant or bar, or, you know, friends from your dance class or your yoga class, or, you know, your friends who are friends of your friends and friends of your husband or wife, or, you know, whatever. Hospitality, I think, has stronger friendships than most other careers by such a long way. Of all the things that are conducive to friendship, like all the things that people go through together in hospitality, it creates stronger bonds. The people I worked with when I was, you know, part-time leading into full-time, particularly my final year of university, I was one of very few students on there, and one of very few final year students who had like a dissertation and stuff like that to deal with, and they were super understanding. Like, and then I'm quite lucky in that I've always just been a grafter. Like, people often brag about being a grafter, and I don't think that's really necessarily something to be proud of. I think it's something where I can't trace the root of it. I can't remember the point at which I decided to just work really hard at stuff. I think that's just the way I'm wired, and as a result of that, it's not really something I've earned, so I have neither the right to be proud of it nor, you know, ashamed of it. But the guys I was working with knew that I was just naturally a hard worker, and so if I said to them, you know, I've got some big deadlines coming up, and I would really appreciate some accommodation with that, they pretty much give it to me. So, you know, went both ways. All
right, Sub 13. When did you start working there? And then we're going to go back, or at the same time, say why your how it was that you told your family that you weren't going to do it anymore.
Yeah, I think that was a steady process, but still going. Sub 13, I joined shortly after graduating. I'd not really decided what I wanted to do, if I wanted to go back to Australia, if I wanted to move to London. Certainly.
Wait, hold on for a sec. You said back to Australia. Had you spent any time in Australia?
Yeah, so I'd had a year, my third year of uni was in Australia at a placement at Macquarie University.
And only neuroscience, no bars?
No, in fact, my visa wouldn't allow me to.
Okay, all right, so back. So you decided what
you were
going to do.
Deciding whether to do that. I'm trying to remember exactly when I started working at Sub. I decided to stay in Bath, and I think a part of that was procrastinating the next step. You know, if you graduate from a very oversubscribed degree, regardless of what your conviction is and what your direction and where you want to be, etc., there is a very daunting step. If you graduate medicine, you're probably going to be some kind of doctor. If you graduate English Lit, it's not that simple, and it is such a competitive job market. So like in psychology, most people either go into clinical or they go into teaching, a couple of other things, and I didn't want to do any of them.
Or academia, I guess.
Yeah, or academia. I didn't want to do any of them. So I don't think I made a decision to sort of find a way to apply the degree to hospitality. I think I just decided to stay in hospitality for now, and I'd been doing part-time stuff at Sub 13. It was a really, really fun bar. At the time, it was probably the best cocktail bar in the city, and I really loved learning about that stuff. And the team I worked with were my best friends. They were super cool. I every now and then when I'm interviewed, I'm asked to name a mentor or something, and I kind of struggle to do that. But if there was one person, it would be Tim Wellahan, who was the manager I worked with there, who was just an incredibly solid guy and taught me a lot of stuff when it came to sort of the basics of cocktails. I was doing part-time there, and then I came into work one day and they'd had a full-time kind of assistant manager position open up, and I took it, and I had a solid year of 70-hour weeks, which I loved and hated in equal measure, and then burned out really hard and decided to move to London.
So what did you like about working what excited you about the cocktail part? Was it making the cocktail? You already said about you love the people you work with.
Yeah.
Was there also God, I asked 27 questions at once, by the way.
No worries.
The actual cocktail making that you fell in love with at all?
Yeah, the creativity part of it was great. I think I've been quite fortunate in that from a very early standpoint, I viewed the creativity conception part of cocktails and the actual manifestation, putting them together physically. I've always viewed those as two separate things. And I think that saved me a lot of, not hardship, but probably just being a dick. Quite a lot of that in the future, because a lot of people confuse those two things and put their values in terrible places. I was lucky enough to just avoid that at an early stage, probably because of this Tim guy's guidance. But yeah, I love the creativity of coming up with new recipes. And even my very, very rudimentary understanding of that at the time really, really interested me. But just the service aspect of cocktails, of being in a bustling setting, having someone come to you and ask you to make something from them, not to pour a beer or something like that. And, if you have a divine interest in beers and wines and you want to maneuver someone towards the right choice, then in some ways you are creating that for them. But in a more literal sense, putting something together for a customer, I loved it. Absolutely enjoyed it, especially because I'd spent almost probably 7 or 8 years by this point working in pubs. It was so refreshing for me.
Mm-hmm. And so then you said, you very fast forwarded and said you went to London. You burned yourself out and went to London. Why was London going to be the next step?
Well, again, luck. A lot of here at CDC, I probably receive 5 or 6 CVs in email every week. And some of the time I have this little niggle where I just think, this is the most staggeringly lazy job application I've ever seen, because they haven't even written their own CV. It's just some Europass thing. They haven't addressed it. If you want to find out the name of the owners of this company or the manager or anything, it's so damn easy to do. And there's something that bothers me a little bit about just tossing your CV out to the world and expecting the world to come back to you with answers. I always was much more specific. I basically was just better at applying for jobs, I guess. But there's also a sense of unfairness to that, in that a lot of the CVs I'm getting coming from abroad, these guys didn't have many advantages that I had, but one of them was just pure geography. I was just sort of burgeoning, just coming on this this love of the drinks industry from Bath, less than 100 miles from what is probably the drinks capital of the world, and I'm a British national. It's just impossibly lucky in many ways. There are lots of industries, which have another capital city as, the destination for training and for growth and stuff, varies across industry. And in this industry, this one particular one I'd fallen on my feet in, the single best place I could have possibly gone was up the road. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my friends live there. it was a really obvious choice.
Was there one specific place you wanted to work?
To be honest, not really. I had a bit of a sort of big fish, small pond mentality at the time, I think. I kind of saw myself as a bit of a big shot. But I also think I had just enough intelligence to recognise that this bar I was working there, lovely as it was, probably wasn't as good as these London places. Probably. I reckon I just like to think that there was something special about it, but maybe not completely convinced. A lot of the big names, Savoy, Artesian, and all this kind of stuff. Dandelion wasn't actually a thing by that point. It was before that. A lot of those places, I recognised that what I loved about hospitality, the fun, the fast pace, just how informal our service was as well. It wasn't gonna work for me.
No Savoy for you.
Yeah, no, not at all. That's never been a fantasy of mine to entertain. But I applied to Niger. I applied to an absolute bunch of places, and I got none of them because, in retrospect, my CV was like one place for a year. It was an incredibly weak CV. There was no way.
What was your title there? Were you like head bartender or just a bartender there?
Assistant manager.
Okay, assistant manager.
Like, useless. From a CV's perspective,
Right.
Absolutely useless. So I ended up just moving to London anyway, and I started working in events stuff, which is great money, but usually pretty soulless. If not, there are great events companies out there, but for someone who, like me at the time, wanted to really grow creatively, that's not what the events market really wanted, certainly not at the time. Most of their clients were just, right, come here, do mojitos, sure. Every now and then I'd get some private party gig, and it would be really, really cool. But most of the time, really, I was just doing events work with very unmotivated people who just needed the money, and I'd use that money, I guess, just like them, to support myself, and then I'd have my own little home lab as such, and just I spent probably 6 months just experimenting with homemade stuff, and that was fun. That was nice. And then eventually I got a job at a bar called Shaker & Co. I moved to Camden, and I ended up being bar manager there, and they had a consultancy arm, and that's kind of where my consultancy started going, as I quit early. There's not many neuroscientists in hospitality, and by this point I'd started having a bit of a fascination with the way the brain constructs and perceives flavour as a neurological experience, not just a sensory one, and so I started working with their training school, and I started working in their consultancy and stuff. Got a couple of clients, and then I was managing their bar. So that was really good, because that was kind of a triple workload in some ways.
And were you getting out of it what you thought you would when you left Bath to come to London?
Yes and no. Shaker was a difficult business to work for in some ways, in ways that I can't really go into without it becoming deeply unpolitical. But I think in many ways I did grow there, and in many ways I didn't, the way I wanted to. But the consultancy in particular was a really, really useful thing, mostly because it was just enabling. I think a lot of people in the drinks industry are very capable of doing consultancy, but how to establish yourself is just a totally different skill to actually doing it.
When did you start thinking about using your neuroscience, or had you been doing that all along? Bring that into this other world that you had decided to
some
follow.
extent, I'd been doing that all along. When I started reading up more on certain people who were formally putting it in place in actual licensed venues, I started to see patterns and ways I could apply my sort of fairly lofty ideas at the time, actually realistically. And I started naturally imitating them to some extent, and then kind of came out with my own sort of understanding of things. And part of its validity as I guess a worldview within cocktails for me is that it is still growing. It's not a phase I went through. I am very much still learning and understanding it, and most of what I do now is actually disregard things. Most of the time I seem to spend more time internally shooting down old theories rather than creating new ones. I think I started with a very complicated understanding of how flavour works, and it's steadily just become more simple to me.
Is it, just to define it a little more, how someone like me who orders a drink, why they order that drink, or how the flavors are going to affect me? So
the funny thing is that is the sort of the common understanding of what it would be. and that's not what I thought it
It's
was
not
at the
at all
time.
what I just asked.
But no, that is, you absolutely are right. I overcomplicated it a lot to begin with, and made it so much more to do with the brain and how we interpret the molecules and create flavors, that I actually largely discarded the customer in like the early stages of my understanding of this, which was, I mean, maybe a necessary error to make so it could evolve, but it was very obnoxious. And it's part of why, like, I have a certain cynicism for people who take kind of a similar approach nowadays. When bartenders are applying here for jobs and they're trying to tell me about like the science and this sort of stuff, I usually see that little twinkle in their eye, which I had, which actually involves probably being dicks to customers.
Or just assuming, I guess, they're going to order, like, okay, I look the way I do, so I'm going to order this one thing.
Yeah, that can be a fairly troublesome discussion anyway, because if we're honest, when you make an assessment of someone based on what they present to you, if you are correct, that's just a heuristic, that's a rule of thumb, and that's being good at your job. If you are wrong, you are prejudiced,
right?
And that is a very, very thorny bush to go wading into.
Mm-hmm. So you're working and consulting? Did you think that there would be a place where you could put this all in action, like your own place? Was that the goal?
I'm not even sure. I remember having, so most of my friends from school and university had gone into, real jobs, as my family would probably put it at the time. I used to joke about that all the time, from a defense mechanism. But yeah, like I'd have, friends and family being like, right, so when are you opening their own bar? And I think that was less about demonstrating an interest and perhaps tolerance of my lifestyle and career goals, and more about, them, I think, assuming that that's what I wanted to do. And now I look back at it and I think that actually in many ways bar ownership is not all that, for a variety of reasons. If you want an easy, good life within hospitality, consulting is vastly better. But I didn't outright have plans for a bar that were just on hold. I didn't outright have issues with owning a bar. I wasn't trying to avoid it, but I also wasn't especially geared towards it. I think, again, perhaps a slightly more positive spin retrospectively on it was, I think I was still just trying to find out who I was and what I wanted to achieve, or what I wanted to be good at, how I wanted to be defined.
Well, we're sitting in your bar, cocktail training company. So why don't, after Shaker & Co., tell me about how you came upon where we're sitting right now and how that happened.
So after Shaker & Co., actually during Shaker & Co., I had met Andy, who I think was the first person you interviewed.
Yes.
Andy and I met at a drinks competition, which was kind of funny. It was my first ever competition, and I was sat next to this lovely guy and his wife. I think they were married then. Yeah, I think they were married then. And that turned out to be Andy and Jen. And when you've known someone for a long time, it's kind of fascinating to interface how you see them now with what you first encountered. And those just don't fit together for me, but I've just got to trust myself that it's not some weird mistake. It definitely was them. I'm sure it was them. But yeah, I was in this competition, and I'd been put through to the final really just as a courtesy nod to Shaker, because we were hosting the competition. And I'd never really put a competition drink together before. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was super nervous in the presentation, obviously. And I remember... I'm not ashamed of this at all, actually. I remember speaking to the other competitors, looking around the room, seeing what was going on, and thinking to myself, if I beat even one of these people, these national finalists, I'm going to be so proud of myself. And I want that to be this one guy who will remain nameless, who I thought was such a knob. And like, he really, really ground my gears. And I just wanted to beat this one guy. And I ended up taking third, and he took second. I was so annoyed. But the guy who won was also absolutely amazing. That was Nathan Merriman, who I think went on to work at... No, he was working at the Sephora at the time, and he was absolute quality, and, well, presumably still is, but I haven't seen him in a while. And Andy actually took fourth. So in my head, I was like, all right, so this guy's lovely. I seem to have beaten him. Well, that's cool. I felt pretty good about it. And then, 2 weeks after that, he won world class for the UK. I was just like... all right, that's an annoying way to put me back in my place. And the funny thing is, Andy and I, we just crossed paths all the time. We never made plans to, go out for a beer, get to know each other, or anything like that. We just constantly saw each other at drinks competitions. And I think perhaps I'd started to be a little bit more sort of team focused. I'd started to, consider leaving Shaker, and I'd been thinking, who do I want to work with? Who do I think I could learn the most of? But also from a partnership perspective, who could I have that weird balance with, where on the one hand there's a compatibility, and on the other hand we have totally separate skills. So that kind of bolster each other. And Andy resoundingly stuck out in my mind for a long time there, because I was constantly seeing him in competitions, and we were both really young. Andy's horrifically, embarrassingly young. Andy is 2 years younger than me. And at the time, I was in these comps, and pretty much everyone we were competing against, because at some point we'd both gotten quite good at this, most of the people we were competing with were 5 years older than us. And I didn't get many wins, but I was always holding my own. I was getting bridesmaided quite a lot. I was constantly getting second. But Andy, I always remembered seeing him, really liking him, really loving his creative approach to stuff, but also remembering that not only is he like me and that he's considerably younger than everyone else, but doing fairly well, but he's actually even younger than I am. And I had my eyes on him from that moment. And at some point, I remember seeing him advertise online, Steam and Rye, where he was going to go and set it up. And I applied for the position of head bartender, and he gave it to me. And Steam and Rye was 8 months of absolute madness. It was such a weird place. In fact, I can be quite honest about it now because it's closed. Yay. Steam and Rye was on the very bottom floor, was going to be a like kind of speakeasy sort of vibe. It's meant to have like a sort of old timey train coach kind of feel to it, and that was meant to take advantage of the fact that certainly at the time in the city, as in the area, the city of London,
right.
Bank general area, there was actually a bit of a glut of real quality cocktails. Meanwhile, there were lots and lots of bankers with an extraordinary amount of cash, very happily blow it and expense it on cocktails, and so they wanted the downstairs area to be that. And then they had this like top floor, which is like private hire, and then in the middle was realistically the prime fillet of this, steak sandwich, which was a 550 capacity mega room, and it just unsurprisingly it warped things massively. So my job was like downstairs, like doing all the quality and like basically being a speakeasy about it, but the business didn't care, and they couldn't have, because it couldn't have survived on that. It needed the sales from the ground floor, and the ground floor was like 6 stations of pure madness. It was just so busy, and it was such a weird and diverse place, and the team was magnificent. Like Andy is an architect of many things. He builds our bars, but he's an architect of a team in a very bizarre way as well, because he picked up grafters, he picked up creatives, he picked up just party animals, and somehow we didn't all hate each other, which was really, really fun. But we both got quite ground down by their business. It was a very hard company to work for, and our customers were questionable at times. Andy definitely had it way worse than I did. But at some point, he and I just started just talking very casually about maybe doing our own thing at some point. And he had his eyes on the site in Camden. I mentioned that I'd saved up a lot from a variety of things, but mostly from the consulting. And there was maybe I might be able to afford to invest in something together, and it kind of continued from there. And then at some point, he told me that there was this guy called Ollie who he used to work with, who he'd said, like maybe they'd go into business someday, and maybe I should speak to him. And what I said earlier about having this really weird disconnect between the person you first meet versus who they are now is very, very entertaining. Because the first time I met Ollie, I remember he was quite a skinny chap who came in with a nice moleskin coat, and I remember thinking, this guy's disappointingly friendly. He's very, very nice. Almost.
I didn't know anyone could
bland.
be disappointingly friendly.
And of course, he turned out to be one of the strangest people in the world, and also probably my best friend. I'm saying all of this, looking at him creepily.
Yes, he's right behind us.
He's right behind us. A couple of blowtorches between us by coincidence. But yeah, so met up with Ollie. We got on very, very well. He ended up, for a variety of reasons, needing a place to live. And he did what could only be described as magpied my flatmate by crashing on the couch until she could not bear him anymore, and she left and he took her room. And a beautiful friendship began. um, but by this point, Ollie had handed in his notice to where he was working at London Cocktail Club. Ollie and I were living together and driving each other mad. And Andy was working out the last of his time at Steam and Rye, and I'd stopped working there and was just doing events and one or two little consultancies, and we were focusing on trying to get up on our feet as a business. We decided the Cocktail Trading Code was going to be the name of it. We decided a couple of like very sort of very basic but quite profoundly different like principles to the business and to the brand, the things we wanted to do differently, than the stereotype of ownership within hospitality.
Did you all agree with everything?
Well, this is the thing which I've always found quite like funny but also quite warming about it, in that Andy, Ollie and myself are three of the most incredibly different people in many, many ways. But certain core principles, almost by coincidence, seem to be very similar. Mm-hmm. And it's made like life so much easier working together, because there is quite a profound sense of trust. Even just being honest, the fact that all three of us utterly hate drugs has completely changed the way that three people can work together in owning a bar. Never had to question what's in the safe. Never had to worry about someone maybe just whacking that off to the casino and popping it on green. Like it's never been a concern. There's always just been a very basic understanding of one another, a good deal of trust, and just the knowledge that the three of us seemingly are just decent guys who don't have a history of messing people around, screwing anyone over, don't seem to enjoy it, don't seem to have endless neuroses or the need to put others down and make themselves feel better, etc. And it's always just been very, very easy, the three of us being on sort of a plane and understanding.
Well, your core values can be the same, but you could have completely different ideas of the kind of bar you wanted. Was there internal struggle, or did you all three know exactly?
We spent a great deal of time, and I think there's this almost like celestial aspect to people's personalities and the things they want to accomplish. If your different values are kind of objects with their own like orbit and gravity and stuff, and their maybe their importance to you is their mass and thus the extent to which they affect other things around them. If three people spend a great deal of time in each other's company, those orbits tend to sort of coalesce, they tend to interact. And I think we did have very different visions. I think Andy and Ollie had a fairly similar vision, and mine was very different to begin with. But by spending a great deal of time constantly talking, constantly discussing, it wasn't a compromise that came about, it was a collaboration. It wasn't that they wanted, maybe Andy and Ollie wanted A and B and I wanted D, and we arrived on somewhere between B and C. It was that the whole thing escalated into something that was better than what we could have accomplished individually. And as I say, we are very different people, but we also are quite polarized individuals, in that I think each of us has one or two areas in which we are exceptionally strong, and almost by a balancing act, one or two areas in which we are unbelievably, pathetically weak. And by there being three of us with a mutual goal and a good friendship, it was quite quickly defined what roles each person does, so that those tremendous weaknesses never reach the public eye.
And only the cocktails came to the table.
And only the cocktails came to the table, yeah.
So you had this idea, and originally they were pop-ups, right? Or
well, yeah.
Is that wrong?
No.
Because I remember the first time,
yeah.
we're 4 years ago, I went downstairs through a different restaurant to Smithfield's, exactly.
Yeah, well, pop-ups are, a really trendy thing. Here we are sat in a bar in Shoreditch, and pop-ups probably, I reckon, are written on the walls roughly 1,000 times in the nearest postcode. But for us, a pop-up was just the only available thing. Mm-hmm. We were trying to act like grown-ups and, pitch for sites and everything, but honestly, it was hilarious. Like, I don't know what madness it would take for a landlord to look at three 25-year-olds with basically no money, no covenant, like no real established background, no leverage. Like, for us to completely dick a landlord around and not pay rent would have not really had much of a fallout on us in many ways, apart from the the usual legal ramifications. We had nothing to lose because we were such junior operators. And though we'd represented other businesses and operated to a fairly decent level, and thus had the experience, arguably, to pull it off, by not having covenant, we were pretty much untouchable. So we'd pitch for sites, and we just never, ever got them. And then a real stroke of luck happened. Andy had consulted with someone called Hezi, who owned Urban Leisure Group. he'd done a few menu designs, bits and pieces for them in the past, and Hezi had approached him about the basement of a restaurant he owned called Central & Co., and said that the downstairs area was just not performing at all. And, did Andy have recommendations for a rehaul or a rebrand or, just new menu and stuff? And I remember actually going to that bar once, and it was a really cool space, but it just didn't work. It was a really cool concept, but it just didn't really work. And Andy was halfway through, designing a new idea and a new menu when he spoke to me and Ollie and said, why don't we just try to take it off his hands? Why don't we just try to say, right, I could charge you this much money to do a menu for you, or this is what we'll offer you annually for us to brand the space as our own and open up our first spot. And unbelievably, they went for it. And the result was like a dream-like start to a business. Like, we literally couldn't have had a better win. The consequences of screwing up were so low that we had an opportunity to take some big gambles, to take a really different direction to a bunch of things. The costs involved were also so low that we had the opportunity to do a bunch of things right from the start. Two of the main trends, and annoyingly they are trends, they should be fundamental principles which matter to everyone, but they are also trends. Those things in hospitality right now would be, mental health and employees' rights and treating staff the right way, etc., and environmentalism. And those were core principles to us. But there's also no denying that if we hadn't been so fortunate financially to begin with, we just wouldn't have been able to follow through on those principles. It would have come at the expense of opening our business. So right from the start, we were able to go zero to landfill. We were some of the first people to use, metal and Pyrex straws. And we didn't tweet about it, we didn't talk about it. It was just what we thought was right. But we were able to do those things. We were able to launch a new business with three of us with basically dick all experience and pay London living wage. And as a result, our team just fell into place. We had friends who we'd previously worked with, some at Steam and Rise, some at London Cocktail Club, just really fall behind us and give us just everything we needed to launch a really, really great bar. And a key part of that, as I say, was luck.
And I guess sitting here now in your own space, obviously the cocktails and the creativity, the what you had chosen to offer on your menu was successnthe vision you had that you three agreed on at the pyramid, that was.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, I've talked quite a lot about Andy. I have to some extent left Ollie's input out on this. Andy was, and still is, an incredibly creative person, but his creativity sometimes requires some translation. Some of the things within Andy's head don't translate the same way to other people. He is simply wired differently, and it's a little bit having the best joke in the world, but people don't get it. Me and Ollie, to some extent, acted as translators upon that. But Ollie also kind of shaped me in some ways, in that my whole neuroscientific approach and everything, though I'd steadily become less of a wanker about it and was much more focused on the customer, Ollie introduced something to me which I think I'd been told but publicly or openly agreed with but not really enacted, which was just to do with atmospherics and actual good hosting, actual proper accommodation of people. Mm-hmm. There's this idea that the best service comes from being treated politely, but to me polite is cold. Mutual respect isn't the same thing as politeness. The best hospitality any of us experience is usually going to our best friend's house, and Ollie kind of educated me on that to some extent, but what it kind of translated to me on a neurological level, and as I say, it was something I was aware of but never really embraced, was the fact that no matter how much I study all these neurological processes, they are unified in a part of a brain that long precedes conscious awareness, which means that all the things happening around us, all the things which contribute to our other senses, are going to be mixed up before we are aware of them. So from a neurological standpoint, all these atmospherics things that Ollie had picked up in his degree in music were, if anything, more important than all of the things that I'd studied so hard to focus on. Because, let's face it, you can go to a great bar and have a crap drink and still enjoy yourself, whereas you can have the best drink in the world in an utterly crap bar and not enjoy it. So I kind of had a lot of my zeal tempered by that, and it resulted in a really nice kind of pyramid as such, whereas Andy's creativity and obsession with operational efficiency, which are two things you rarely see in the same human, meets kind of my perfectionism when it came to like balance of liquids and understanding, the operations within the brain that construct taste, aroma, and flavor, meeting Ollie's absolutely unparalleled understanding of hospitality, and atmospherics, lighting, music, etc., etc. And the thing is, that's kind of what made us in many ways. We didn't have the PR budget to tell everyone that we were doing the coolest stuff out there. What we had were incredibly visual serves, which did amazingly well on social media because it was just as things like Instagram and that were kicking off. So we basically had some of the best PR around without paying for it because everyone was doing it for us. A lot of bars produce beautiful cocktails and then don't actually want people taking photos of them because most people are crap photographers with their camera phones. Ours were ridiculous serves, which always looked good, even if they were a little bit blurry, and that put it absolutely everywhere. But the main thing is the atmosphere was always amazing. Like, that was always a fun bar to work in, no matter what. I had some of the worst hangovers of my life behind that bar, and I always had a good time. Meanwhile, as I say, like, the team we got on board were really cool. The understanding of hospitality we've always had has been, kind of welcome to my house, much more about just like openness and honesty and actually wanting people to be there. Most of the people who we work with in all of our bars now are outrageously, almost insecurely social people who derive their happiness from people around them. And that's a level of hospitality which you can't always train. But for whatever reason, they flock towards us. And then we had some good reviews come in. We had Time Out absolutely sort us out. They gave us 5 stars and Bar of the Week. And I remember going from a Monday, which was the quietest shift we've ever had as a business, and being very, very stressed about it, to a Tuesday where the restaurant upstairs was empty, but our bar in their basement had a line out the door. And that Tuesday was the busiest night we'd ever had at that point. And the Wednesday was a record. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday were all a record. And from that point on, it didn't really let up that much. Like, the initial exposure leveled off a little bit from Time Out because we weren't Bar of the Week anymore. But it was a small space. It was really small. It was, 40, 50 seater max. And those are, everyone feels like they're mostly made of elbows. But it was just busy from that point on. And we were able to recover our opening costs within about 3 or 4 months, which was unbelievable.
Fantastic.
And then at that opportunity, at that point, we had an opportunity to work with Ben Alcock, who's our business partner from the Bristol bars, so Her Majesty's Secret Service and Filthy 13. And, we could have either paid ourselves out at this point, but to be honest, we'd only been operating for 6 months at this point. We thought, well, this is the time to really be working hard. So we opened that place with him. And then we got the opportunity to do Smithfields. And then, unfortunately, we lost both those sites because they were subleases of arguably quite questionable legality, if we're honest. But again, like, for whatever reason, the gods just took care of us, because around the time when we were standing to lose those sites because the buildings themselves were going, we signed on this lease here. And we had sufficiently good trading history by this point that we could get bank loans, and without selling any equity or anything like that, we managed to get the funds together to actually take on our first full lease. And it's funny talking about it because it feels like this incredibly long journey, but all of this only happened within a year. It all happened incredibly fast. And now we've got Brick Lane, which because we've got it for 25-year lease, we actually could properly invest in, not as one brand ambassador early said, I really enjoyed this when he said, oh yeah, it's fun in here, it's like the Artesian, but everything's from eBay. That was absolutely true. Everything was from eBay, everything was cheap as hell. And then we got this actual lease and this actual site, and we could actually make it nice, and that was great. And then since then it's kind of never really stopped. Andy, Ollie, and myself didn't get into hospitality so we could stop bartending. We're all in full-time service. We've got 2 bars in Bristol. We've got CDC and Murder Inc. now in Tottenham Court Road, which is amazing to get back into that area because that's where our first bar was. Always missed it. But we're all still doing what we're doing, and we also love it. That's why we do it.
Well, that sounds great. I want to have one of those drinks that you've been talking about that photograph so well.
Absolutely.
Should we go to the bar and have one?
That sounds good.
And what a cocktail it was. It was so great to have finally had Elliot on my show, I can't tell you. And for the 150th one, well, it was better than words can say. Now it's time to celebrate with that cocktail of the week. Our cocktail of the week may not be easy to make, but this Mitsuari's downfall is well worth the try. You kind of have to make it up as you go along. There are only 3 ingredients. 3 parts monkey shoulder Scotch whiskey, and that's the easy part. 1 part jalapeno and fennel syrup, that's mixing jalapeno and fennel and cooking it down with sugar. And finally, 4 parts of clarified pineapple cilantro soda. All I can tell you is that clarifying is the process of removing impurities from a liquid by skimming the surface of it as it's heated. Hope that helps. Oh, make sure when you're done to chill it and then carbonate it, which means making it bubbly. Then pouring it over an ice sphere when you're ready. Didn't get any of that? Well, that's why we go to Cocktail Trading Company and leaving it to Elliot, Andy, and Ollie. You'll find this recipe, more whiskey recipes, and all the cocktails of the week at alushlifemanual.com, where you'll also find all the ingredients in our shop. I know that cocktail of the week was impossible to make, but I feel we all needed a bit of fun during what is an insane time. My day-to-day concern is that if my parents get ill, I won't be allowed into the USA to even see them. So a month of trying to clarify pineapple will make me feel as if I'm achieving something. If you live for Lush Life, would you consider supporting us by buying us a coffee? Just go to buymeacoffee.com/lushlife, and you can donate once or monthly to make sure we are still here every Tuesday. Theme music for Lush Life is by Steven Shapiro and used with permission. And Lush Life is always and will be forever produced by Evo Terra and Simpler Media Productions. Which leaves me to say the wise words of Oscar Wilde, all things in moderation, including moderation, and always drink responsibly and wash your hands. Okay, the second part was mine. So the news. Thanks to our friendly pandemic, COVID-19, Lush Life is taking a break. I must admit, it's a little tough doing interviews face-to-face when you are not even allowed out. I'm busy exploring options, so keep on following me. I'm still on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at A Lush Life Manual, where I'll be making some drinks at home. Until next time, bottoms up.